Hey guys, Rich here, Rich's Custom Marine and Auto. Today we're working on a 2007 Chevy Avalanche. The issue with this is it's got a bad number 4 lifter. Did a bunch of other troubleshooting. It actually needed spark plugs. Tried a coil pack, a fuel injector. Did all the basic troubleshooting for a cylinder 4 misfire. And on these you get the StabiliTrak light and a few other things with the check engine light. Had broken exhaust manifold bolts. We took care of that. And then pulled the valve cover off. Ran it on just one bank, and if I can find that clip, I'll insert it here as to what it was doing. So I've already gone ahead and done quite a bit of work here. This is all pretty straightforward stuff. So what you need to do is drain the coolant. So you'll have to get underneath. On these there's no drain valve, so you got to get the lower radiator hose off, and it makes just a wonderful mess for you. And then the upper radiator hose on these comes off of here, comes up across the top of the fan shroud, and then comes in over here. Get that thing out of your way. You've got this line here that goes to the steam fitting right back there. And you can see I've labeled these. I don't know if it's gonna focus. There it goes. But I've labeled them, and that's the best way to go. The other thing I've done that I recommend in all my other videos, if you guys have followed along and you've seen them, is take a bunch of pictures from all different angles around the engine. That way, when you're putting everything back together and you're like, well, where exactly did the harness clip? Where exactly did this line go? How was this routed? Then you can just refer back to your pictures. And then up here, right up in here, and over here, there's 2 bolts, and you can get the fan shroud out, unplug. See, these are the fan connectors there and there. And once you get those bolts out, then that fan shroud just lifts straight up, and then you can tip it back just a little bit and it'll come right out of there. The transmission lines have these little U-shaped clips that go in there. You just take these little covers, just kind of protect those clips, so you just take and slide that back, and then take a little bitty screwdriver or even a pick and pull that back all the way out of there, and then the lines will come off, and you can see I've put a nice cover on them. So you got one there and one down there. Let's take a quick look at what those clips look like. Alright, so that's what the clip looks like, and pretty easy. Just keep a solid hand on those things, because they like to fly across the shop, across the garage, or whatever you're doing this. Napa and the parts stores have these because they know that they get lost easily, so it's not a deal breaker if you lose it. And the other things we've done here is we've got the wire harness unbolted from the alternator and the field connector, and then we've got the throttle body disconnected, so this stuff can all lay to the side. The next thing that I'm going to go in and do is I'll go down and label these injectors. This side's the even side, so it'd be 2, 4, 6, 8. And then I can get those unplugged, and then we can get to laying this harness off to the side. Down here you can see where the lower radiator hose connects. This is your thermostat housing, and then these are where the heater hoses go, which I've got laid up over the battery up there out of the way. I don't like to mess with the connections at the firewall if I can absolutely help it, because the material that the heater core tubing is made out of is really thin, and you start yanking around trying to get a hose off of that. Sometimes when the vehicle's got some years on it, you can actually damage that, and then you got to pull your whole dash and everything. It's just a nightmare. So I'm just hoping that chucking those up out of the way, it should give us plenty of room to get that cylinder head out of there. As you can see, the airbox is out of the way to give us room. Taking that all loose and taking the air intake off of here is all straightforward stuff. The engine cover, it just pops up and then it'll come out of there. Some of them get a little stuck because there's rubber grommets that fit on these, so you might have to actually be a little aggressive when you lift that thing off of there. So, but all pretty straightforward stuff, and if you're someone who's going to attempt this job, that won't be any big deal at all to you. So I'm going to go ahead and label those fuel injectors, and that way we can get to setting that harness aside. I'm undecided yet if I'm gonna pull the inner fender well out. I'm probably going to, just because it makes getting the exhaust loose so much easier. But jack the vehicle up to where you just get the tire off the ground, pull the wheel and tire out of your way, and then pull that inner fender liner, and you'll thank yourself later for the amount of room you give yourself. But if you haven't just recently done exhaust manifold bolts like I've done on this one, you probably want to soak them and the heat shield bolts, these guys, in PB Blast or Croil, whatever your favorite knocker loose, whatever you like to use, so you can get those things to come loose. Alright, so we've got that removed. We've got this connector removed that goes to our coil packs. Next, we're going to go through and take all of these bolts out, 10 millimeter deep. There's one there, one down there, one back there, and then on this side, you got to come in from, basically from the side. I'll have to move some of this stuff, but there's a bolt all the way in the back that you can't see up against that sound deadening material, and then that'll let us get these coil packs out of the way. Okay, so that's got our coil pack set up out of there, and I just put everything in the bag and then just zip tied it to it, and I've got a parts box going over here. Now this is what the top of your valve cover will look like, and at this point I will go ahead and I'm going to pull this wheel off and get that inner fender well off of there so we can get the manifold off the exhaust. Now we got the wheel off. We've got these push rivets here that come out here, here, there, here, these along here, and then you've got this bolt here, which is a 9/32 or a 7 millimeter will work, as well as here, and then one more push rivet there, and then that thing just kind of tacos in, and you can pull it out of there. Okay, and in case you guys were wondering, these have a centerpiece. You pull that centerpiece out a little bit, and then you can get underneath that lip and pry it up, and they'll come right out. Sometimes the center will pop all the way out, no big deal. Thankfully, these style, when that happens, nothing gets damaged. Okay, so up here, you can see we've got, I believe that's a wire. So, you just push that through. There we go. Now these ones are a different style. And you don't want to put your tool on the edge and pull back against this painted edge, because you'll end up possibly damaging your paint. So that's why you see what I'm doing here is I just pry against the inner fender well itself. Alright, and then we can get the last one on top there. And then that thing comes right out of there. And now you can see, and we could have got to most of that from the top, but the ones that you'll really appreciate are the collector nuts right there. You'll really appreciate having that off of there to be able to get to them. So also you can see I left the spark plug wires hooked to the spark plugs up there because they're a heck of a lot easier to take off when you can get a nice straight pull on them. Alright, so now we got the exhaust manifold off of there. You've got the studs that go into the collector there. Those are 15mm nuts. And then the bolts, I believe the factory bolts are 13mm head that go up in there. The ARP bolts that I put in there are 10mm head. If you're not super careful, you may want to go ahead and remove the spark plugs, because you can drop that exhaust manifold down and actually damage those, break those plugs. So something to think about. If you do pull your spark plugs out, you probably want to plug the holes with something. Like I'm going to get some rags and I'll plug the holes in the head there. And so now we'll just go do the same thing on the other side. Alright, trying not to show you guys redundant stuff. Driver's side exhaust manifold is off. Driver's side coil pack assembly is off, and all the fuel injectors are disconnected. Next thing I'm going to do, I kind of want to get this harness out of my way, but the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get this alternator out of the way, because that's going to just give me easier access back into there. So these two bolts here, and then we already had the electrical disconnected prior, and then that thing should pull right up out of there. Okay, as you can see, guys, the alternator can kind of get stuck in there. Just make sure you don't pry along here. If you pry up, make sure it's under these bosses here where that alternator is really strong. Alright, so I've gotten the power steering pump along with the alternator bracket out of there. It's got 4 bolts. So you got 1, 2, 3. This is the back side, of course. And then there's one on the bottom. And then on the side of the block, this guy right here, you'll need to take out. And then that gets that thing out of the way. So that's looking real good for that head. Of course, we'll pull the water pump and all of that stuff as well. I've also pulled off the tensioner. It bolts on these 3 spots here. Those are all 15 millimeter head bolts. These are all 15 millimeter head bolts. So it looks like the water pump is 10 millimeter head bolts. So we'll go ahead and keep taking this thing down. Eventually, of course, we'll have to take this steam crossover tube off of there. And then, of course, well, the intake's got to come out of the way, so we'll get to that guy as well. So we're getting really close here on a bunch of things, so we'll be able to get those heads off. At this point, you can see we've got the water pump out of the way. There's just 3 bolts on each side, and then I'll have to pry those gaskets off. We'll replace those. Of course, we'll have to get the crankshaft pulley off and get the harness off of here for the cam position sensor and the crank position sensor, because we'll have to get in there in order to get the camshaft out. I'm going to stop working on the front of the engine now and move my focus to get that intake manifold out of the way. Okay guys, the intake is out. All of these 8 millimeter headed bolts that are along there inside the fuel rail on both sides, those are what have to come out. And up top here, there's the VLOM, the valley plate. Pretty straightforward deal. I found it easier to remove the brake booster line off of the booster instead of dealing with trying to get it off of there while I was supporting the intake manifold and all of that. For the fuel line, get you a set of these fuel AC line disconnect tools. It's the yellow one, it's the smallest one on the end there. And make sure your fuel system has been depressurized, because you pretty much won't get that thing disconnected if it isn't, and if you do, you could actually hurt yourself. So make sure you follow the procedure, which the procedure is you can pull the fuse, or you can pull the relay, fuel pump relay, and then start the engine, let it die, and then crank it a few times to make sure that you've gotten all the fuel pressure. So in our case, the vehicle had sat for several days. So I didn't have any fuel pressure in it anyways, so it didn't really matter. You also, this harness goes up and over the intake, so you got to kind of hold it up. And then what I did is I just enlisted a helper. I actually put my feet down here, one on the balancer and one on the AC bracket, and picked up the intake, supported this wire harness, slid the intake out like so, and then handed it to my helper so it could be just set on the bench over there. So actually very straightforward process. You don't need to use a pry bar. It doesn't really get stuck, and if it does, it's not enough to where just putting your hand underneath the throttle body and just kind of lifting just a little bit and it popped right loose. If you've got to put any more pressure on it than that, you've probably got a bolt still in it, so make sure you go back over and get all your bolts out. And in the procedure, it says absolutely do not reuse the intake manifold gasket, so make sure you have a set of those. So now we're going to move on to getting the crankshaft pulley removed, and then we'll start getting the timing cover off. Alright, so the driver's side head is off. We'll document what we did on the passenger side head. Valve cover comes off really easy. It's got a few 8mm head bolts, and they come right out. Next thing you want to do is get ready to pull your push rods down in here. So you want to take these rocker trunnion bolts, 8mm head, but because of the cam, some of these are under tension and some aren't. If you look down, I don't know if the camera will show it, but some of them are down a little bit. Normal. You want to go about a quarter of a turn at a time, taking each one of those bolts out so that you don't bend anything, or you just want to reduce the torque gently. And so once those are all loose, there's a bar down in there, this guy, and you can actually lift that whole rocker arm assembly out of there. And then you want to label your push rods. You also want to make sure you inspect them to make sure there's no abnormal wear. Obviously we're putting new lifters in here, that's why we're doing this job. So the bottom end down inside of here won't be as critical, but they do have a wear pattern. They wear in, so you want to try and put them back. Some people will say that's not necessary. So anyways, in my opinion, whenever you do engine work, you want to keep track of where all the parts came out of when you're reusing them. If you're going with all new push rods, you know, or you're going to new rocker arms, I get it, but you're always better off. If you see me tear an engine down that's mine, that I'm going to build in the future, and I plan on not reusing stuff, I'm still labeling things and putting them in order and all that. So so I'm going to go ahead and I've already done a quarter turn on these. I'll do another quarter turn and then just keep backing those off, and then we'll get a shot in there with that rocker assembly off. Okay, so this is that bar and the rocker assembly I was talking about. Once you get all those bolts broke loose, and then you can just reach in there and pull this bar out of the way. Okay, so now that gives us access to the head bolts, and we're going to take care of those push rods, of course, first, and then I'll show you guys there's a sequence that you need to break those head bolts loose, because you can actually warp the head, and we'll go over that. Alright, so we're getting ready to pull this passenger side head off of here. The whole idea here is, like I said earlier, you want to relieve the torque evenly. So I'll put a picture up to show you guys, but you start in the middle. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the bolts, I don't know if you guys can see them, but the bolts up at the top here, you do those last, but you do the center, and then you work your way out. And then that head comes right off of there. Alright, this is the part I'm going to edit and speed up. Once you have the torque completely reduced on them, then you can go ahead and run them out with a ratchet, but you still want to go ahead and use the crisscross pattern that you used breaking them loose. Guys, now all the bolts are out, we're ready to lift this thing off of here. I like to take an old towel and set it up on the radiator support, and then I've got a helper here that will take the head gasket stuck. she is. Alright, and at this point, we'll go ahead and we'll peel this head gasket off of there. And then I'll do this off camera, but you want to take paper towels and you want to get all that coolant out of the cylinders so you don't have any chance of rust. Next thing we're going to do is work on getting the timing cover off. So down at the very bottom, and I'll try and get a picture, see if I can get a shot from underneath, but there's two bolts that hold the oil pan to the timing cover. We're going to get those off first, and then we can take all these other bolts off, and we should be able to pop that thing off of there. There's a shot of the bolts. As you can see, that's a junkyard oil pan that I put on here because one of the quick lube places for this customer, they like to use an impact on the oil drain bolt, and so I had to replace the oil pan. But yeah, we'll get those two out first, and then we can get the rest, like I said, and then that thing should come off of there, and that'll expose our timing chain, so we can get the timing chain off of there. And at that point, we'll pull the valley cover up top, and then we can start pulling the lifter bucket. Okay, so looking at it, the bolt that goes right there, so that's for reference right next to the AC compressor, you can get that bolt to come out. Use a 10mm shallow with a universal joint, a wobbly, and then you can get that thing to come out. So it's good if you don't have to mess with the AC. I mean, it wouldn't be a huge deal. You could take the bolts loose here and there and on the bottom, and then tie it off to the side like we did the power steering pump on this side. But less stuff to take apart is a good thing. Alright, a little bit of a light pry on the top, and that cover came right off. And then blocked the engine so it couldn't turn, broke loose the cam bolt. Next thing we're going to work on is we got to pull, this is the oil pump, so these two bolts and those two bolts, and we can slide that off of there, and then we can work on getting our timing set off. Alright, I've cleaned off that valley cover. Looks like those are 13mm headed bolts, which that one hand tight. Interesting. I need to get a couple connectors disconnected in the back and labeled there, and then so that will be the DOD solenoid and the oil pressure switch. Something to think about, it's not an uncommon issue in the LSs to have an oil pressure problem, and it's always, I shouldn't say always, it's mainly that switch right there. And with the intake on and stuff, it takes a special socket and all that. It's kind of a bear. You may want to go to the dealer or go to Rock Auto and get a genuine oil pressure switch. I wouldn't grab one from the chain parts stores. I just wouldn't do that. But probably a good time to go ahead and replace that since you're in here doing this anyways. Okay, we've got all the lifters and buckets out. You can see my magnet was there because these buckets get old and they don't retain as good as they should, but not sure how well that's going to show on camera. But yeah, that was our culprit, and it was starting to eat itself a little bit. So at this point, this is what we're looking at, and we're ready to pull the cam out of there. Okay, with the cam retention plate removed, we can go ahead and work on getting our cam out. Okay, and with your radiator out, you have just enough room to get that thing out of there. So we'll clean this up and then have a look at it. Alright, so now our goal today is to get these cylinder heads cleaned up. You can see we want to get all of this head gasket remnants off of there, get the chambers cleaned up, have a good look at the valves. First thing we'll do is get the spark plugs out of the way, and then of course we'll inspect our valve springs, make sure that none of them are broken or damaged and everything looks good there. After getting all the head gasket material off of here, we'll lay a straight edge across here. We'll go diagonal there, and then we'll do diagonal the other way, and that way we can tell if it's straight or not. If there's any air gap between the straight edge and the head, we'll use a feeler gauge to determine how much the air gap is, and if it's not within spec, which I'll look that up on all data, we'll have to take these to the machine shop and have them surfaced. So, and that's going to be our goal. The way I'm going to do that is, these being aluminum, you don't want to use anything that's really that abrasive. I am going to use a brand new razor blade by hand, just go over it real carefully, and then I'll use like a green pad that you would use for dishes. I wouldn't use anything, you could use brake cleaner, but other than that I wouldn't probably use anything that's harsh. And, you know, I wouldn't use like the dollar store Awesome Cleaner or Simple Green, because that stuff is corrosive to the aluminum. So what I think I'm going to do is probably just use a little bit of WD-40 or PB Blaster, and then like I said, I'll take the green pad and I'll just kind of clean that up real good until it's all cleaned up and flat. And probably we'll do one last wipe with the brake clean sprayed on a rag before I do the squareness check. So you definitely want to take your time when you do this part, because you know it's really important, obviously. And then you can see where the remnants of the exhaust gasket were left. We'll scrape all of that as well, and then of course this thing will all go back together with new gaskets. We'll do the same thing on the engine block. We'll get to that once the heads are done. I just want to get the heads inspected, get them to the machine shop, which is probably an hour and a half away, if they need to go there, because that usually takes several days of turnaround because those guys are really busy. So, but like I said, we'll of course do the same thing on the engine block, get all of that cleaned up, clean up the exhaust manifolds, clean up the intake manifold and all that stuff. One thing of note, I may have already mentioned it, we'll talk about this when we go to put the heads back on, is that the head bolts are torque to yield. And what that means is when you torque them down to spec, you actually stretch them a little bit. So they're a one-time use, so those head bolts that you took out to get the heads off, they go in the trash. Just get rid of them and buy a new set. Okay guys, so the oil pump is now out. I'll go over real quick what you got to do to get that thing out. You'll need to go underneath and take all the bolts out of the oil pan. Of course, drain the oil pan and then take all the bolts out. And fortunately on this rig it's a two-wheel drive, and then let the pan sit down. You can see the gap there between the block and the pan, and it's less on this side because on this vehicle the steering rack is in there and it's sitting on one of the lines, but you can very gently, you take the 10mm headed bolt out that goes there, and then you very gently can pry down on that flange away from the oil pump, and then the oil pump will come off. You don't want to bend that that pickup tube too much. And then of course you want to have it covered like I did with something to make sure you don't get any debris in there or anything. That's your main oil system. Alright, so now that shows us the setup to be able to get the crankshaft timing gear off. I'm just using a 3-jaw puller here. I had ground these down previously, but you can see there's not a lot of room back there. So you will need jaws that are pretty thin. You can get a puller that has thin jaws. You can also go, I know there's a guy online that went to Harbor Freight and he bought a bearing puller set, and the smallest bearing splitter will actually fit just in between these bosses and the block and go on there, and then it has screw-in studs, and then you can get to pulling there. But this setup that I have seems to be working pretty good. So the only thing that I may have an issue with is how much larger this crankshaft pulley bolt is than the shaft. If this thing doesn't let go before I get there, I'll have to use an extension or something in there for my puller to ride on to get that gear off the rest of the way. Alright guys, so it's only pressed on to about there, so now it's ready to slide off. We can go ahead and just take our bolt out, and then that'll slide right off of there. So now we're ready. We've got it all apart, of course. We're ready. We can pull these gaskets off. These guys here and these up here. Water pump and timing cover gaskets. And get ready to put the cam in, the new cam. Alright, so everything's cleaned up now. We're ready to put the cam in. So we're going to use lots of assembly lube here. You guys might not be able to see this, but you just want to make sure you get a nice coating of assembly lube all the way around. And then what I do is I do the rear bearing up to the next bearing, and then I go ahead and start. Then it'll kind of support itself right there, and we can come through. You want to make sure you do the lobes and the bearings. This is definitely a spot you want to take your time. Don't be in a hurry. You want to make sure your garage door, shop door is closed. Turn fans off that are close in the area. You don't want any dust blowing around. Try and minimize friends, family, workers walking by, because they just walking by can stir up dust that you don't want to get inside the engine. And just go real easy. There'll be just a little bit of clunk clunk as you go, but if you go real super easy with this, it won't hurt anything. Now I'm going to have to grab the bolt or probably extension to give me some leverage here to hold this cam up. Okay, and now that the cam's in there, it's going to be a little sticky because of the assembly lube, but you should be able to turn that thing by hand. If you can't, you need to take it apart and investigate why. So the cam is resting back a little bit. It's resting against the rear plug, and that's okay right now. So at this point, we'll be ready to put the cam retainer on there, and then we can move towards getting the lifters in. Here's the view of the cam being installed from the front. We're using a Brian Tooley Racing kit. That's the retainer plate. The reason you want to use a new retainer plate is because of this, the red seal material right there. If you don't have a good seal on that opening across there, then you'll actually have an oil leak there and you'll have a low oil pressure issue. So these things are pretty cheap. I don't know what the exact cost is, because like I said, we got it in the kit with LS7 lifters and then a replacement stock cam and all that, but they're not expensive, so pick you up one of those. Okay, we're all ready to put cam retention plate on. I'm going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on each one of these. These bolts get torqued to 11 foot-pounds, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do half of that, and then I'll do the 11 on the second pass. Make sure you clean your bolts up good. These things are pretty covered in oil when you take them out. You guys saw the plate in the bag. You don't get replacement bolts. I'm sure you can order new bolts, but these aren't a torque to yield or anything. They don't stretch, so you really don't need them. You can reuse them. No problem. Cleanliness, guys, is something that you just can't shortcut with an engine. Off camera, I probably got somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 hours, 2.5 hours of cleaning, and that's gasket surfaces, carbon builds up down inside where the lifters go and the lifter bores there. Cleaning all of that. When you take the heads off, the cylinders get a bunch of coolant in them, stuff like that. Getting that all cleaned out, dried out, cleaning the cam bearings. You can use a stick and tape a paper towel on it to go in there and wipe those things and make sure they're all clean. So I'm using an inch-pound torque wrench, and I went ahead and just set it to 70. That's close enough to 5.5. It's actually closer to 6, of course. But now we'll go ahead and go to our 11 foot-pound setting. Should be 132 in inch-pounds. Alright, so that wraps up the cam retaining plate install. And now I'm going to get set up to install the lifters. Kind of hard to get you guys a good angle, but here's the lifter tray part number. So these things, in case you didn't watch what way they came out, let me back up. You'll always want to replace these guys. They get hot and they distort. So also they have these slots, and the hole for the bolt is offset. They'll only go in one way. So there's a boss in the block here that'll only let this tray go in one way like that. So very important, in the instructions for the Brian Tooley LS7 lifters that we're using, you have to take them out of their container and clean them with automotive solvent, like say parts washer fluid, and then clean them really well, and then put them in oil and just soak them in oil. These are soaked for 2 days. So you just want to make sure everything in that lifter, on that lifter, is just soaked in oil. You'll see air bubbles come up out of there, and then you want to go ahead and do what I'm doing, get them started in there, press them all the way in. And then at that point you're ready to go ahead and install them in the block. And then they go just like so. And now we'll go ahead and do the other trays. I'm going to do all of that before I put the bolt in. Actually makes it really easy to install the lifters, guys. And if you're wondering, maybe you're an old school small block guy and you're wondering what is the purpose of these. So these have the flat slots, and that's what keeps the roller aligned on the roller lifter. Okay, with those trays all in, now let me go look up what the torque is and we'll get the retaining bolt put in. Okay, so here's the process for getting ready to put the head on. You want to make sure that none of these bolt holes have anything in them. All the lower ones will have coolant sitting in them. So what I did is I just used a little plastic syringe with a piece of tubing on it, pushed it down in the hole, and then just draw back on the syringe, and that took all the coolant out. And then you want to go through, use your air chuck and blow them out again. So I did all of that. If you had any that were questionable, you should run a thread chaser through there. All of mine seem good to go. so I didn't worry about that. And then I took a rag with some clean engine oil, 5W30, and wiped the cylinder walls. Just put a light coating on them, and then after that, spray some brake clean onto a rag and wipe all of the gasket surfaces and make sure everything's nice and clean. Of course, we'll do that same thing to the cylinder head. Also, make certain that your dowel pins are in front and back, because that just makes sure everything lines up just perfectly right. Don't install your head without those. So at this point, the driver's side of the block is ready to go, and we'll go wipe down the cylinder head with brake clean on a little bit of rag, and then we'll be ready to set that on here. So now we've got the cylinder head wiped down and it's ready to go on. If you took it to the machine shop, took yours to the machine shop like we did, you'll need to put your bracket and the ground wire back on. This is the driver's side head. So it's time to set that gasket on there and get going. Alright, not easy to get the camera in there, but I do have the head gasket sitting on there. It is very important that you have where it says front towards the front. All data specifies that specifically. Okay, set it on there and then just gently move it around, and then you'll feel it drop into those dowel pins. So we'll go grab our brand new head bolts and get those going. Okay, so we got the new bolts here. These bolts, some head bolts require oil on the threads. These actually have a thread locker on them from the factory. So that's the main, and then these are the little guys for the top. So that's why the procedure wants you to clean out the threads really, really good, is so that once you get these torqued down, I'm assuming that's a heat activated Loctite that they use. Alright, so I'm going to use my quarter drive electric impact here. This thing's probably only capable of like 15 foot-pounds, if that at most, but I'm not going to slam these things down. I'm just going to seat them. So this is just to make it quicker to run them in. So I mentioned this when we took the heads off. Everything you do with cylinder heads, you want to do in a crisscross pattern. And I will put up on the screen the diagram. So up on the screen is the diagram that shows the order that you're supposed to do the bolts in. And some of you might be thinking, well, what about the top bolts, these little guys? Well, that procedure has you do them last. So now we'll switch the socket and we'll get the small ones. And you'll see sometimes, guys, that I may use an impact socket, and those are my best 6-point sockets that I have. So I know they won't round the head off. Now with these bolts, you want to go, I know you guys can't see it from that angle, but you want to go work your way, hit the center, and then forward, back, forward, back. And the back one has a bracket on the back of that head that we gotta try and work around. Alright, so our first pass on the larger bolts is going to be at 22 foot-pounds. We start right here in the middle. Sometimes working around the steering and brackets and wire harness and stuff, you got to get a little creative with your extensions and combinations of deep well socket and shallow and etc. Then it has us do the back one. And the front one. Okay, so that's got all the big ones. Alright, so now we're going to set the torque wrench to degrees. And it wants us to go 90 degrees in order. So nice thing about this is a snap-on torque wrench, but I think just about all of the digital ones do it nowadays, is it keeps track of how much you've torqued in degrees, so you can ratchet it like a regular ratchet and it knows You can get a regular angle adapter. I think even Harbor Freight sells them, that goes in between like a ratchet or a breaker bar. And those things have come a long ways. They're pretty good nowadays. My recommendation is, if you're going to do a lot of this work, get a good quality torque wrench. I'm not saying get a snap-on, just get a good quality torque wrench because you need it. And have it calibrated every year or every other year, just to make sure that it's accurate. Okay, so now it wants us to do one more pass on those bolts, and an additional 70 degrees. And if you make a mistake, guys, or something happens, that's fine. You want to make sure this part you get absolutely 100% right. But just know that you got to replace your head bolts if you've got to redo the job. Because you're setting the stretch right now, which also sets the clamping force, of course, of the gasket. Okay, now we torque the small bolts. Those get torqued to 22 foot-pounds. We start in the center. Okay, and I'm going to grab a different torque wrench to use in the back there. That darn bracket in the back there is making that one a pain. So that's the bolt we were trying to get, and that's the bracket that was in the way. So, but anyways, crisscross out of there, and then you guys saw how we did all of these guys and all of those guys. So perfect. So we've got that one all set now, and then we'll go and repeat the procedure for the passenger side. I still got to do the wipe it down and clean it and all that, and I do that specifically because you guys may have seen on the video, but sometimes I put my hand down here and grab to help with leverage for torquing, so I didn't bother cleaning that or anything. So we'll do that and then get the other head on. Tip here for installing the crankshaft timing gear, some guys will tell you just take the old gear, turn it around backwards, and just hammer on that thing to get it seated back. Which we got about that far to go. That's about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 5/16. I don't like hammering on engine stuff because in this particular case, if you're hammering on here, that's going to transmit all of that into the thrust bearing inside, and when you're dealing with an engine that's 200,000 miles, it's already got enough clearance. You know, it's not out of limits, but basically you just don't want to hammer on that. So what I did have to tap with my rubber mallet just slightly, because it was a little tight for this gear to go over the key. So I just lightly tapped on that, and then I'm using the original crankshaft bolt, which the cam kit and all of that I bought, they actually sent me a new crankshaft bolt with the cam kit, so that was pretty cool. But then I took and I just put some assembly lube on here, because you want this bolt head to be able to rotate and not rotate this, the old gear. And might be hard for you guys to see, but as we go here, it's just pressing that gear on. Now obviously guys, there is a tool for this. I'm not sure, maybe even the harmonic balancer tool set from Harbor Freight, you might be able to find something in there that would work. Definitely you'd be able to find a stud that would go in here instead of having to use the old bolt, but obviously this works good. So I'll do the rest of this off camera, and then we'll continue getting the timing set installed. That thing's now pressed all the way on there. All I did to break the bolt loose was I grabbed the old gear that was on there, put a rag around that, grabbed that with a pair of channel locks, and I was able to break that bolt loose. It doesn't take a lot of force using that bolt. I would guess maybe just 10 foot-pounds even. It's not much at all. So here's the new timing chain tensioner. Comes with the bolts. This is a Melling brand that I got off of Rock Auto. It's got the tensioner pinned right here, as you can see, so that's already preset. If you're reusing your old one, which even our 200,000 mile old one looked good, you'll have to pinch right here in between where my fingers are and put a drill bit or something in that hole to take the tension off. So this thing is ready. To go in there like so, and those need to be torqued to 18 foot-pounds, and as with everything else you guys have heard me say, I'm going to torque it to 9 foot-pounds first and then go to 18. Okay, so probably noticed there's no chain on there, but all I was doing was making sure that the crankshaft and the cam were aligned. Remember, we replaced this camshaft, so it wasn't put in there with the timing mark aligned, so I just had to do that. So now, here's what you want to look for. You can see the dot on the crankshaft pulley, and then there's kind of a rounded arrowed type of slot on the cam pulley, and you want those to line up. So the procedure in all data says 6 o'clock for the cam gear mark and 12 o'clock for the crankshaft. So now what we can do is we'll go ahead and pull the cam gear off, put the chain on, and get that, make sure our marks are lined up still once we have that chain on. Alright, that is a tedious job, guys. What I mean is getting the cam pin lined up with the hole in the gear. It's kind of tedious. So use a mirror and a flashlight so you can see in there. And then I have, I guess I dropped it on the floor. I have a plastic trim tool for pulling the interior trim, and I use that. You got a couple openings, windows up here, where you can gently use that plastic to push on the cam lobe, and it'll turn the cam. And then of course we'll go back in there and put a little bit of assembly lube on there. But anyways, so got that thing on there. I do have a new cam bolt. I just used the old one just to pull it into place. Make sure on the back side of that gear that you put some assembly lube. So here's the old gear, so I can show you. You want to put assembly lube around right here. You can see where this was wearing. This rides on the cam plate, so, and it's got these slots so that it can get oil in there. But just put some assembly lube around there, and I wouldn't really put any in this pocket because that's almost a press fit on the cam, but along this area where it rides. And then now that it's installed, we will go ahead and put assembly lube around the chain here and some around the bottom. Once you get that thing on there, you want to make sure the timing marks are aligned like we talked about a minute ago, which these look really good. And then you can go ahead and pull the pin out and tension the chain. You'll want to go ahead and put your bolt in the crankshaft. Go 2 rounds of the crankshaft, and then double check timing marks. And I mean, it's about as good as you're gonna get, guys. Rotating this thing clockwise takes all the slack out of this side and lets the tensioner do its job over there. So now we're ready to we'll pull these 2 bolts out, and we'll go through the procedure for torquing that bolt down. Torque spec on the cam gear bolt, 66 foot-pounds, and then you go an additional 40 degrees. So according to my torque wrench, it's like 168 foot-pounds is what it works out to be. But just follow the procedure, 66 pounds and 40 degrees. So now we're going to set up to put the oil pump on. You guys might be wondering what the rags and the glove is about. This is the oil port for the oil pump. I just want to make sure nothing got in that. And then down there, that's the oil tube for the pickup. So again, just wanted to make sure stuff didn't get down inside of there. So let me clean up the oil pump some and the bolts, and I'll check the spec for torque for the 4 bolts, and we'll get ready to put that thing on there. Okay, if you were wondering how we were going to get the oil pump back on, you take the front cover off, and then you pull this gear out. Make sure you keep the orientation right, the way it came out, and then you can see I've got the oil pump on there with just a bolt on each side. I've put assembly lube on this. And then you just got to kind of mess with it. Alright guys, I needed both hands, so what I ended up doing was taking this gear out and also the outer gear of the oil pump. Again, this is loose and floppy, and then just kind of kept turning and meshing those and got that thing to go in there. So now what we'll do is we'll put some assembly lube in here. This is also where, if you wanted to, all data doesn't require it, and I talked to a guy who does a lot of LS building, and he says it's not required, but this is where you guys, if you see other videos and they put 1mm feeler gauges in here throughout, like 4 of them, and that just centers the housing perfectly, but like I said, all data doesn't require that. And this guy that does a lot of LS building said, no, he says, I've done 1 or 2 out of hundreds and never ever had an issue. So we're not going to worry about it. These, I mean, there is a tiny bit of play in there, but not a lot. And you just want to make sure that this thing's not bound up. So I suppose you could actually turn the engine over some while you're tightening that if you're really worried about it, but this guy said don't even sweat it. So let me get some assembly lube in there, and I'll get that oil pump put back together. Alright, so here's where I'm at. Oil pan's back on, timing cover's back on, and the balancer's on. I don't have the new bolt in there yet, as you can see. Some very important things here. When you put the oil pan back on, put all the bolts in and run them up to where they just barely touch, and then make sure you get the 2 that go to the transmission. They're the bell housing bolts on the bottom. And the procedure is to go ahead and run those bell housing bolts, those 2 bolts in. And it says snug, so I ran them in and then just put a little bit, you know, maybe 5 or 10 foot-pounds, probably closer to 5, not much. Just ran them in and just a tiny bit of snug, and then you can go ahead and run up your oil pan bolts and get those things all up and seated. You want to make sure that you do that procedure because it aligns the back of the oil pan with the transmission bell housing and doesn't put any stresses on anything. So make sure you follow that procedure. And then a similar thing for this timing cover. They make a special tool, I didn't have it, that centers the timing cover because there's a little bit of play in these bolts. But you want to make sure that it's centered for that seal, so the seal's not riding harder on one side of the balancer than the other. So what I did, I don't have, I told you guys this when I pulled the balancer off, I don't have one of the balancer remove install tools. I guess one of these days at Harbor Freight I'll have to pick one up. or you can get them at Napa or AutoZone or anything else. You can probably rent them too. So what I did is this. I took the old balancer bolt, I turned it down in my lathe to make this small enough to fit through the balancer. Don't mind my weld that I did without cleaning it up. And then I drilled the end of it, and then I took this 1/2 inch grade 8 bolt, turned it down, pressed it in there, put this all in the lathe to make sure it was true, and then tack welded it, and then took it out of there and welded it. So what that did for me is I can just run that thing in there, run it all the way down by hand, and then I've got some spacers that I put on there with a big washer, and then I just ran this nut down, and it just nicely pulled that balancer right on in place, and that went ahead and centered up our cover for us. So you still have full access to get to all of the bolt heads to be able to torque those. You want to torque those to 18 foot-pounds. And then, like always, you guys are probably tired of hearing me say this, I always go half of that, so I did 9, ran around there, did them in a crisscross pattern, and then came back and did them at 18. Same goes for the oil pan. All those bolts that go along the sides and along the front there, they are 18 foot-pounds as well. There's 2 little bitty bolts that are super long. They're probably 5 inches, 6 inches long. In the very back of the oil pan, goes straight up from the bottom. Those are 106 inch-pounds. And then the bolts I tried to show you for the bell housing, it's a little dark under there, as you saw. Those get torqued to 35 foot-pounds. So just make sure you follow that order, guys, because it's important. Like I said, I'll say it again, that's how important it is to make sure that the oil pan is sitting where it's supposed to and it's not putting stresses on anything. And then same with this timing cover, so that you're not wearing out your oil seal early. So that's going to do it for today with the magic of cameras. I'll see you in just a moment. But I'm done for the day. I got to charge all my lights, and we'll see you tomorrow. Drop my light, and then get a little bit of a push down, and that'll push that lifter out of the bucket. And so now we're at the point we've got all our push rods in place, and we can go in there. I'm going to go in there with a rag with a little brake clean, and I'm going to wipe these pads. Alright, so now we got all our push rods in place. We can go in there with a rag with a little brake clean. We'll clean all of these pads, so we can go ahead and start getting the rocker assemblies on there. We're not ready to put them on yet, because if you look, I don't know how well it's going to show on camera, but this number one intake is on the cam lobe right now, and if we were at top dead center, these should be both down off the cam lobe. So off camera, because it's going to take me both hands to turn that balancer, I will get this thing rotated around to where it's at number 1 top dead center, and then we'll go on from there. Okay, getting ready to put our rocker assemblies in. We've got this guy all cleaned up. Especially want to make sure, let's see if we can get that to show. Especially want to make sure that these pivot spots are clean, and that it's clean underneath. And like I said, I've gone through and I've wiped these. Might have just a tiny bit of engine assembly lube on there. So I'll do another quick wipe. And then we can go ahead and lay this on there. Like so. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube in each one of the spots that those rockers are going to ride. And then of course on the end of the push rod as well. Make sure you're inspecting your components, guys. It's easy to get wrapped up and just, I want to get this thing back together. But make sure you're inspecting here. You don't want any rough spots or scratches or anything like that. Make sure you inspect the pocket and that it's all in good shape. And then your trunnion, you want to make sure that moves nice and free. Again, we've verified that the engine's at top dead center on the compression stroke for number 1. Go ahead and do assembly lube here. A little bit of assembly lube on top of the valve. My opinion, you can't really have too much of this stuff. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and do each one of these. Some of them, of course, like it looks like the number 3 intake is on the cam lobe. It's up right now. So just run those bolts down as far as you can by hand. And then we'll go over the procedure for getting these all torqued down. So the end of that push rod is supposed to be mirrored finish, and hopefully that's going to show up. I can get it edited in the video editor where I can zoom in and show you how it's kind of looks like sandpaper's been run in it. And the same for the rocker arm. But basically these guys, as those of you that don't know, these go like that. And then as the lifter pushes on the cam, it pushes and opens the valve. Well, the lifter pushes the oil up through the bottom there. And actually you can probably see pretty good how shiny that one is. So the lifter side was good, but yeah, for whatever reason there wasn't any oil getting up to the top of this push rod. And so you can't really get, I mean, I'm sure you probably could somewhere, but I couldn't really get just one push rod, so I've got a set of push rods coming from Summit Racing. And Summit is somebody that I use when I've got a customer vehicle apart and I need something quick. As you guys that have followed along on the channel know, I use Rock Auto as often as I can, but the problem with Rock Auto is you got to plan on 7 business days, so it can take 10 days sometimes to get your stuff from them. Usually it's a week, and sometimes you get stuff pretty quickly if it's in the closest warehouse, but Summit is pretty much a guaranteed 3 business days. I ordered 1 rocker arm and the set of push rods last night, and it said they'll be delivered Tuesday. So you know that's pretty good. So 3 days, 2.5 essentially. But So yeah, so we're on hold there, and then I've got cylinder number 8 rockers right there that I still need to clean and install. But why even go ahead and do that when I've got to replace the push rods and stuff anyway? So yeah, that's where we're at with that. So we'll get back to installing the things we can. So I've made sure my surfaces are nice and clean. Okay, those get torqued to 11 foot-pounds. Like I always do, I'm going to go a little lower than that. And then we'll set, I'm actually using an inch-pound torque wrench because it's such a low torque value. So we'll go to 132. Alright, so that's got our thermostat set. At this point, I don't want to put the alternator on because that'll just be in our way. So I can work on getting the driver's side exhaust manifold installed. And I've got a couple plastic covers down by the oil pan that I can put back on. And at that point, we're really at a standstill for our valve train parts. And I've got a buddy that's sending me a valley cover because we're doing the DOD delete, as we've talked about. And that takes a specific valley cover. Really, it's just kind of flat. But that thing is coming from Mississippi, so we might be a little bit held up on that thing as well. Ready to put the exhaust manifold on the passenger side. Got the brand new factory MLS gasket. Pretty clearly marked manifold side and down. So double check that I've got the right one. Yep. So I've cleaned this surface up. It had some of the old gasket. The old gasket was a Felpro, wasn't a multi-layered steel. So the gasket had separated. I cleaned that up. And then this guy here, donut gasket, just comes out of there. I didn't replace it because when I inspected it, it looked just really, really good. I did replace the crush seal on the other side. It's a different style. We'll show that in a minute. We're all set up here to do the driver's side now, and I wanted to show you. Here's the crush gasket that goes to the exhaust pipe on the catalytic converter. You can see the groove right there. Kind of goes without saying that you need to replace it because they get pretty flattened. But and this one was leaking, so for this I just ran to the local parts store, and there's the Felpro part number. Comes right up. Napa had it in stock, O'Reilly had it in stock, so seems like pretty common enough thing for them. And then so now we'll go ahead and get this side in. Okay, so we got the exhaust manifold in there, of course. You want to torque the bolts. First pass is 11 foot-pounds. These are the center two, so I just went with the one on the right, then the one on the left, and then I went to that one, and then it gets real hard to see them, but the middle one up front, and then the one on the very back, you can hardly see it, but you can get in there. Heck of a lot easier with a wrench, but I use a crow's foot to torque it, and then the very front one. So you want to do that. And then when we go to do these, we'll torque those to 37 foot-pounds. I like to torque the exhaust manifolds to the head on both sides first. That way, before you tighten those, because that way you know they're going to be flat to the head and you're not going to be distorting anything. It's just a good practice. Okay guys, we're over on the passenger side now. We've got the heat shield on. All of those little bolts, they get torqued to 80 inch-pounds. And we've also got this heat shield installed. Bolts are down there and back up in there. Those are also 80 inch-pounds. So we're gonna leave the spark plugs out for right now, because when the push rods and the rocker arm get here, it'll be a lot easier to roll the engine over. We'll leave those out for now, and we're gonna leave the inner fender wells out right now because it's a heck of a lot easier to do some of the spark plugs and the plug wires right through there, so as you guys can see. So we'll pause right there, and we'll be waiting for push rods and a rocker arm to show up. One other thing we can go ahead and do, guys, while we're waiting on parts is we can install these little block off plugs. These are from Brian Tooley Racing. If you're doing what we are and you're deleting the DOD or AFM depending on the year, and you took out those lifters that deactivate the cylinders and you go with the LS7 lifters like we did, you need to block off these oil passages, and I'll bring the camera closer in a minute. These people use a lot of different things. I've seen several different things online that people use to block these off. One of them is, there was a part number for a tapered roller bearing going around that people were using the rollers. Don't do that. What happens is you can crack these housings. Again, I'll show you closer in a second. But you can crack those and then you start losing oil pressure. The other thing about using these from Brian Tooley is they're actually threaded up inside of there. So if you ever have to have the engine rebuilt or whatever, you can just run a bolt in there, and then you can just pull these things back out with like a little slide hammer or something like that. So with these, they're pretty tight press fit as expected. We'll go ahead and lay a bunch of paper towels here, because there are a couple of holes where things can fall down inside the engine. That would be a bad deal. Okay, you guys could probably hear that, but we'll show you again here. Alright, so this should give you guys a little bit closer look at what we're doing. Get the little plug started and just kind of support it there. Now listen to the sound. It'll sound like a dead thud, and then it kind of gets to be a sharp. So here we go. Alright, so you can kind of hear the change there. That's when you know it's seated. These they do protrude a little bit above this surface, but that's okay because the new valley cover and even the billet aftermarket and all of that, they're designed for that little bit sticking up, so it'll be just fine. So we're going to go ahead and get the rest of these in and move on. Okay, so we've got our new push rods and the new rocker arm. As you can see, it stands out, installed. Everything's got assembly lube on it. I wanted to run over the procedure with you real quick here of torquing these bolts down. So this side is the driver's side of the vehicle. You can see the brake booster over there. This is 1, 3, 5, and 7, 2, 4, 6, and 8. Okay. You should still be at top dead center from doing the timing chain. Even if you rotated it 2 full turns of the crankshaft and relined up your marks, you should be at top dead center for the number 1 cylinder. So for this guy, if you're not sure, go in the spark plug hole and I've got a little inspection camera that I put in there and just verified that I was in fact top dead center. Alright, so the procedure is cylinders 1, 2, 7, and 8 exhaust valve. Okay, so if you're not sure, so we know 1 is here. Put your hand in here, you'll notice, I could probably show it on the camera, what direction that runner goes. It goes in and goes forward. So this one is the intake and we want the exhaust. So you'd go on here and run that down until it seats, and then they want 22 foot-pounds. Okay, so number 2 exhaust. So this is number 2, but now on this side the intake runner goes that way, so this would be your exhaust. So run that down until it's seated and go 22 foot-pounds. Then 7 and 8. So now we know that the exhaust is the forward one on this side, so we'll go that one, and then the back one back there. And then for intake valves, we come back and we do this guy, and then cylinder 3's intake, which is, sorry, looking through the viewfinder, which is this guy, and 4, which is this guy, and then 5. Okay, so which is that guy. And then they want you to rotate the crankshaft 1 full turn, right? So that makes the cam only turn half a turn. And then you do cylinders 3, 4, 5, and 6 exhaust valve or exhaust rocker bolts down to 22 foot-pounds. And then with the crankshaft in that same position, you do 2, 6, 7, and 8 intake, run them down and go to 22 foot-pounds. And then from there, I actually went 1 turn of the crankshaft and ran through them all again. and then went one turn again and ran through the procedure again. So just to make sure that there weren't any that I had missed, and I was good to go. So I've also installed the radiator at this point. That just simply sits in the bottom. Make sure the rubber donuts are on there, and then you got these 13 millimeter headed bolts that hold that thing in place. And now I'm gonna go change the gaskets out on the valve covers and then get those things installed. Alright, so we got our valve covers here. These things can be a little bit of a pain to remove, but you just kind of pull and wiggle and they'll come out. And then the gasket just pulls right out. That's what you're pulling against, is that little rubber guy right there. So I use Felpro for quite a bit of stuff, guys. I probably wouldn't use Felpro for a head gasket, but there's the number. The reason I say I wouldn't use Felpro for a head gasket, I've done many head gasket jobs using Felpro years ago and they were great, but nowadays pretty much everything has gone to MLS, the multi-layered steel, so they're just an all-around better setup. So now we got to get these off of here so we can put the new ones on. A little bit of tugging and working and they'll come off of there. Clean that shaft up. Put just a little bit of oil around there. Now you want to make sure that you're going to put this on there the right way. So it goes like so. That thing pops on there. Still got just a tiny bit of oil on my hand, and that thing will just pop right into the valve cover. So again, get that thing worked off of there, clean it. A little bit of oil on that ridge. Make sure that rubber piece is pointed the right way. Work that on there. And then just set it down in there. Now, I don't need to show you guys all the rest of those. So then, for the main gasket, these gaskets have a profile. So, thinner here than there. That thinner part is what's got to press down in the valve cover. And also, there's this is formed to what the valve cover needs. So, start out with those. And then just kind of work it around. And if you happen to stretch this a little bit, or it needs to be stretched a little bit, these things are really easy to work. Just work around in that groove. I want to press that thing down pretty good so it'll stay. And then that's got the gasket in there. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these bolts done, and then when I bring you guys back, we'll be installing those. Alright, I've gone ahead and wiped the surface, the gasket surface there. We're ready to set the valve cover on there. One other thing I want to mention is these breather hoses. On each valve cover you have those. Make sure you take compressed air and blow that out, or even when you're cleaning your valve covers, spray some brake clean in there and then hit it with compressed air. One of the problems that these LSs have is they'll start smoking when you initially take off from a stop, and what that is that PCV breather is actually blocked with carbon. So make sure you blow those out and get them clear. So we'll go ahead and get all these started. I can see the gasket's all good there. I'm going to take a look in from the wheel well since I've still got the fender well out real quick. I just want to make sure that gasket's not sticking out at all. So now I can run these down until they touch. For these valve covers is 106 inch-pounds, and that little Milwaukee impact, it has a lot more torque than 106 inch-pounds. So that's why I say just run it down until it touches. You want to just run these down evenly. You'll start to feel when there's a little bit of friction there. Another thing you may want to do if you're changing your valve cover gaskets is you may want to replace the O-ring that's in here. This filler neck just rotates and then comes out, and a lot of times those O-rings, they expand, swell basically from just the heat and the oil and all that, so it's a good idea to replace that O-ring. And there's only 4 bolts, but you still want to kind of work your way out from the center with your torque procedure. So that's that. We'll go ahead and get the other one installed off camera, and we'll be ready to move on. Alright, so we got the dipstick tube in. Not sure, yep, we can see it there now. Because it goes in between 2 runners on the exhaust manifold. And then like 30 foot-pounds for that bolt. You want to block the hole in the block when you pull that thing out. So here's what I did. This is just a heavy-duty vacuum cap. And I just cut a little slit into it and kind of squeeze this thing into itself, and then it started in that dipstick hole in the block, and then I just kind of pushed on it pretty hard and got it in there good to go. We've installed the AC belt, we've got that done. Got the lower radiator hose installed, and then we've installed the cooling fans. They just sit on, basically on the same tray on the body of what the radiator sat on. And then, as you can see up here, it's bolted just like the radiator is. That's really easy. Transmission lines go back in with their little clips, and then you slide these covers over. Might not have enough light to show that one. There we go. So, got those back on. They each have a bolt. There and there. And then looking down in there, the connectors there and there that I don't have hooked up yet, those are what actually go to the fans. Like so. Same thing for this one. This one might be a little harder to see because it's dark, but you guys, I'm sure, just heard the click. And then again, we can take our label off. Alright, so I was thinking about putting the alternator on, but again, I'd rather just have that thing out of the way because it sits way up top here for working on the valley plate and also for putting the intake manifold on. So at this point, I'm going to continue working on, I'll go ahead and get these heater hoses hooked up. I'm going to leave the upper radiator hose off because it basically, as you guys will recall, it comes from here, runs all the way across the top, and then goes to its fitting there. So that thing will just be in the way. So I'm going to hold off and not do that yet. There's a few wire things we can do, like we could go ahead and put this brown wire back on the head there with the stud. I've got it in a little bag, parts bag over there. Actually, it's in a parts bag right here. So we can do that. But I don't want to get too much stuff in the way for when we start going to put that intake on. I mean, I actually thought about putting the coil packs on too, but I think I'll just wait on that because that's a pretty simple, straightforward job. So at this point, other than a couple of things that I mentioned, we're running out of stuff to do. I got to get a hold of my buddy and find out where that DOD delete valley cover is, and with its gaskets. So unless I can find one locally, it was coming out of Mississippi. So that's going to be it for now. I'll bring you guys back once I finally have a valley cover. We can both find out together how long it took to get that thing here. Alright, I've gone ahead and cleaned the spark plugs. They had a little bit of carbon on them. I know some of you guys are probably going to say, just replace them. Well, these only have like 50 miles on them. So this is the plug that we're running. I think the carbon was because of the DOD issue that the engine was having. So what I do is I spray brake clean down inside of the plug, and then I take a brass wire brush, and you got to be really careful because of the center electrode on these is pretty tiny, so be really careful with that. But anyways, I brush around, get all the carbon off, clean them all up really good, and then spray brake clean down in there again and then blow them out with air. So we're gonna get these installed. Oh, and the gap, newer style spark plugs, people say don't gap them. I would say check them. And I did gap these. They're supposed to be 40 thousandths. They were more like 45. So they were wrong out of the box. So I did close them up just a little bit. But we're going to get these installed, and they get torqued to 11 foot-pounds. Alright, so up next, we've got the coolant bleed plugs. These things go on the back of the heads. This has just got WD-40 in it. I'm just going to put a little on there, and then I'll use a brass brush. They don't need to be beautiful, but just get the crud off of them. You could also paint these if you wanted. Kind of be a little highlight on your engine if you wanted. I'm not going to. I'm just going to take a little brake clean. Clean it off with some brake clean, and then I'll blow it off with some shop air. Came out pretty good. So, here's the O-ring part number. I got these through O'Reilly. They're kind of expensive. I want to say they were, trying to recall, they were like $9 per O-ring, and you got to have 4 of them. So now I'll just take a little bit of oil. And I'm just going to wet that O-ring. And then we can just slide that thing over the pin. And that one's ready to go. So this one, you can just use a small screwdriver or whatever to get that old O-ring out. And pretty hard, pretty crusty. So I'll get this one cleaned, and then we'll get them installed. Alright, so I've already made sure this is clean. Set our block off in place. Run down that 10 millimeter headed bolt. Make sure that your little block off with the O-ring, that pin is down inside the recess there. And then you want to torque this to 106 inch-pounds. And there's the other side. So the front ones up here, we'll take care of those because this actually has the crossover pipe, and we'll take care of that after the valley plate's on, just before we put the intake on. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and install coil packs. If you guys want to clean up your coil packs, what I did, it's not perfect, but you can buy the small brush kits with the wire brushes and the fiber brush, and I just took the fiber brush and went all around this stuff and then blew it off with air. It came out pretty good. You'll find this bolt on the back is right on the firewall. It's kind of a pain in the neck, actually. You guys ever go to buy a used Avalanche and you want to know if it's had any work done to it on the coil pack? Well, just look on the passenger side firewall insulation, and there's no way to get that bolt out, that stud, without tearing up that insulation a little bit, at least marking it up, so you'll know right away. And now that those studs are installed, we want to torque them to 106 inch-pounds. You guys might be wondering why bother torquing these. Really, it's just to not strip out the aluminum threads in the top of the valve cover. I'm gonna have to get a 1/4 inch setup to get back there with a wobbly. So this is my setup I'm gonna use. Okay, and then on this side, it has this bracket that holds these heater hoses. Goes like so. Has a 10mm headed nut. And it has the same torque value as well. Alright, that's all there is to it. So same deal for the other side. And we can go ahead and get the plug wires on this side. I've already got the plugs installed. So we'll go ahead and do that next. Okay, so we're ready to put our plug wires on. And these just simply go on. You want to make sure you hear the click, and then it's the coil just directly above it. Those should kind of ratchet on a few clicks. I have put just a touch of dielectric grease inside each end of these. This kind of helps prevent them from sticking later on. And then this back one, I have had issues getting this seated before, and understandably so. Now you can see why I said I wanted to leave the fender well, inner fender well out, because this back one is a pain. And I just like to run over them real quick, and it's easy as that. Okay, so let's go ahead and change these intake manifold gaskets. Using Felpro here once again. Actually pretty straightforward, so I'll show you on one of these. They have these clips, and so you just reach up underneath here, and these things just unclip, and that's it. Take us a nice rag here that's clean, You want to be really careful because these are your fuel injector. You don't want to push gunk down in them. And just know, guys, when you flip your intake over like this, you do it real gentle. You can set it like that, it doesn't hurt anything, but your bolts will fall out. Okay, and now we're ready to line up our new gasket. That looks like that's for the other side. Yep, that's better. And they just pop right in place. I mean, they have made that really, really nice. So we'll go ahead and get the other side knocked out, and then once we get our valley plate, we'll be able to get that installed. Alright, so our valley cover plate is finally here. Got it cleaned up, got it painted, got the bolts all cleaned up. Make sure that you put these little O-ring type seals so it seals on the towers, and then this gasket is designed so that it'll hold the bolts in. So see, I can turn this thing upside down right now and the bolts stay in there, so that's good. I took an old oil pressure sensor and I put it on the lathe, turned the guts all out of it, drilled it, and then tapped it so that I can use my pressure pot fitting, which is a 1/8 inch pipe thread, so that I can prime the oil on this thing once it's ready to be fired up. So okay, let me put this up on the tripod and we'll get this thing installed. And I've already wiped down the surface on the block, made sure it was all clean. Make sure these all start by hand. And again, if you've had an issue with one, just pull it back off, run a thread chaser through there. These only get torqued to 18 foot-pounds, so your electric ratchets can exceed that, so just run them down to where they touch. And I'm going to take a mirror real quick and a flashlight and just make sure that everything is sitting right in the back where I can't see. So I would hate to have an oil leak. Yep, everything looks great. So we'll go ahead and torque these to 9 foot-pounds. Okay, so we're set to 18 foot-pounds. We'll just start on the middle two. And we'll just do an X out from the center. Alright, that's got that torqued down. So now we can actually go ahead and do our oil priming. Be easier without the intake manifold on there. All I'm going to do is I'll use that fitting I showed you guys, and I've got a pressure tank, and it's going to force oil down in there and all through all the passages of the engine and have that thing ready to go. Okay, I've done the oil priming, so now we'll get ready to put the oil pressure sensor in. You want to put a little bit of sealant on the threads, make sure you don't get any in the bottom of it, of course, so you don't block the passage. Run that thing in, and then the torque spec is 26 foot-pounds. There we go. No pressure. My rag and do one more wipe where the intake manifold's going to seat. And we're ready to lay the intake manifold on there. Alright, we got something holding it up. Let's see what's hanging us up here. Yeah, that's a fuel line. Here we got wire harness. There we go. Bolt holes look centered. Alright, we're ready to put those bolts in there and get them torqued down. Quick piece of advice. I don't know how well it's going to show on the video, but this is where your PCV hose hooks up off of the valve cover on the back over there. It's wet. Piece of advice, if you guys have your intake manifold off for any reason, turn that thing upside down. As soon as I turned this one upside down so I could change those gaskets that you guys saw, oil just started pouring out of this thing. It had a ton of oil in it, so I let it sit overnight upside down like that to let the oil drain out of it. You probably also want to clean your throttle body. I've done this one previously, so it's already good to go. And just because of the way these modern day engines, they recirculate the PCV, and there's a lot of oil in that, a fair amount of oil in it, and that ends up going in the intake and just kind of coating everything, and can actually cause issues down the road. If you really were going to do any type of performance work at all, I would recommend you put a catch can on there. Now, I'm not even sure myself what's the best catch can out there to use, but I can tell you that do your research, and if you do put a catch can on there, basically what it is it's a little can, and then the PCV hose, like I said, it clips over there and goes up here like that. Well, you cut this and you put this can in line, and that air, as it's going through there, it swirls it, and as it swirls that air, the oil falls out of suspension in the air to the bottom of the can, and then the air continues on up. So whenever you change your oil, whatever your oil interval is, you go, and some of them have a drain, some of them you unscrew the bottom, but you take that thing, you empty it out, and you've prevented a bunch of oil from going inside your intake. It's a very good upgrade to do. So let me get set up here, guys, and we'll get those bolts in and get them torqued down. Alright, got all the bolts laid in there. I cleaned them because they had a little bit of remnants of blue Loctite on them. So I went ahead and cleaned them. Reapplied the blue Loctite. Procedure says run them down until they touch. And then we've got a process to follow here. So we start in the middle on the passenger side. Procedure has us do 2 passes. First pass is 44 inch-pounds. We do that one, and then we do the middle one here. So 1 bolt back on the driver's side. Not a lot of torque, guys. Like 3.5 foot-pounds. Okay, now we go 1 forward over here. The one behind the center over here. That was 5. 6 is up here. One here. 8 is all the way in the back on the passenger side. Nine is back, the rearmost one on the driver's side. And the last one is the front one on the passenger side. Okay, that's the first pass. Now the second pass, we're going to do that again at 89 inch-pounds. If I had it to do over again, I probably would not have put the coil packs on that side. I left them off this side just to give me room if I needed to come in with the intake sideways. Which I didn't need to do, but torquing this stuff down, it'd probably be just a little bit nicer with that coil pack and bracket not on there. Alright, so we get the back one on the driver's side now. Okay, that's got it all torqued down for us. And so at this point we can go ahead and get the wire harness back laid across. I've got it bungeed up here, but I can get that back laid across and start getting things hooked up. Where when you're putting everything back together, if you're just not recalling where something went, refer back to your pictures that we talked about taking in the very, very beginning, and that'll help you out quite a bit. This goes to our map sensor right here. Got it sit right like that, and then this harness lays over like so. Give you guys a quick look. So this is the way your harnesses will lay. And then this bracket goes like so, and then of course over in the parts box I've got the plate that fits on there that kind of cradles these and holds them down, but it's also what the engine top cover snaps into. Alright, so got the cover over the wires there that we talked about, got this guy bolted down, and this harness just sits there like so. Got the fuel injectors plugged in, but I don't have the locks, the little gray pieces, light gray pieces that go on there. I've got looks like a mouse got to this guy, so I'll double the wrap over that. And it actually needs to route. Underneath like so. I've already had to reference back to my pictures that I took in the beginning just to help me with some of the routing and stuff like I recommend to you guys. So now at this point I'm going to go ahead and put the coil pack bracket on this side, and then we can start hooking up the harness and stuff there. Alright, so we got the coil packs on with their bracket. No spark plug wires yet, but we've got all the connections made. The only thing we've got left, these two go to the alternator, which is what I'm going to install next. Just give you guys a look at what it looks like across the top. Now over to the passenger side, I've got all these little locks, little keepers installed for the fuel injector connectors. Looking good. I've got the steam pipe bolts here, and back there, and then of course there's this line that comes over, and it actually comes off the side of the radiator. So we've got that installed, and everything's looking pretty good here. Let's see, what else can I show you? We got the PCV line on going back to the valve cover. We've got the line on this evap purge solenoid. We've got the fuel line hooked up. So looking good. It's always a good feeling when you start running out of things to hook up. Got our grounds on, and that bolt is tight. Make sure you got all your grounds tight. We had to take that one off as well. Make sure you've got those tight, because those will give you some of the strangest problems. And computers really do not like not having a ground. So Alright, I'm going to get that alternator installed, and then we'll get the serpentine belt on. Okay, got the generator in place. I've already hooked up the harness and put the cable on. That gets torqued to 80 inch-pounds. These main bolts get torqued to 41 foot-pounds. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and put the belt on. Alright, so I got the belt pre-staged there. Move the tensioner, we should be able to push it underneath. Idler. Sit like so. Those of you guys wondering, here's your belt routing. So over the tensioner, underneath this upper idler, over the alternator, straight down to the power steering. Then from the power steering, it comes all the way up here to the water pump, around the water pump, back down, goes around the crankshaft pulley, and then up. So what I did is I put it on everything. I don't know how well you guys could see that. I put it on everything except this idler, and just let it sit across here, and then push the tensioner down, 15 millimeter right there, and just slid it underneath there. Made sure it was lined up on everything, and good to go. Alright guys, just want to do a little closure video here. So, got the Avalanche all back together. Inner fender wells are all in. Front wheels and tires are back on. I've done the test drive on it. It's great. Oil pressure is good. Sounds good. It's going back today to its owner. So, 209,000 mile rig, you know, they could get another 100,000 or more out of it now with the DOD deleted. So one thing I forgot to mention when you're putting the oil pump back on, and I want to stress that because it can be an area of issue for you that I've read about in the past, make sure you replace that O-ring for the oil pump pickup. So you'll want to do that. When we did ours, we used the GM O-ring. I'll put the part number in the description, but it's a $12 O-ring, but the only other brand of O-ring I could find at the time was Victor Reinz, and I've had good luck with Victor Reinz gaskets for valve covers and stuff like that, but I didn't want to use that for that pickup O-ring. It's too much to take apart if it wasn't satisfactory. So hey guys, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to help our channel, and please click like on the video. Feel free to put comments down there, your suggestions to people that are doing this, tips and tricks maybe for those of you that have done this more times than I have, and some of you LS specialists out there. So other than that guys, once again thank you, and have a great day.